Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to take a slightly different approach here, and instead of reeling off numbers and stuff, talk about the BP story, going back almost 15, 20 years, which is where we started first with the outsourcing stuff. The various things that happened along the way, good and bad, where we are today, and where we hopefully will be going forward into the future. At the same time, I'll also talk about sourcing. Most of the discussion here has been about sourcing for services. There's a very important second component in sourcing, which I call sourcing for innovation. The models that we use in terms of sourcing for services are completely different and probably diametrically opposite of what we use in terms of sourcing for innovations. I'll try and bring some of those concepts into the room as well. Let's see if this works here. Okay, terrific. First of all, what is BP? When I first talk to people here, I want to clarify BP is the original British Petroleum. People here talk about Bharat Petroleum, which is the other BP that exists in India. This is an example of kind of the scale that we are dealing with. You cannot talk about sourcing without talking about the variety, the scale, geographical as well as sheer numbers. We all know that it is an oil and gas company, but it is massive. We operate in over 100 countries or 6 continents, and many service stations, about the same scale as McDonald's and even more in some areas. So we've got to keep that scale and size in mind as we go forward. Another source of variety is the types of different businesses we have. Each of these businesses by themselves, many of them would be in the Fortune 10 category if they were left alone. So exploration and production, one of our largest bottom line producing businesses, is entirely a high-tech oriented business. You think of it as aerospace. We drill for oil in 7,000 feet of water. That's almost a mile and a half. Going further, about 15 to 20,000 feet under the ground, below the seabed. Most of the digital technology here is extremely technical computing. We have the 5th largest supercomputing center in the world, almost 160 teraflops. Quite a different set of requirements than your traditional IT shop. Go to the other extreme, which is retail. The retail business, entirely a transaction-oriented business, very thin, low margins, operating somewhere in the range of 13 to 15 million transactions a day. That is how many people connections we have every day at our service stations worldwide. Quite a separate set of requirements from the others, and the others are somewhere in between. Another thing to keep in mind is our heritage. BP, as we know it today, consists of a massive set of acquisitions, merger and acquisition activities over the last 10 years. And you can see a variety of these different brands that have all come together in terms of a legacy, a rich legacy that we have to kind of blend together into a single whole. Each of these brands brings a different set of cultures. I'll keep hammering away on the cultural aspects of sourcing. It is not simply a transaction. You have to consider the readiness of organizations to engage in different types of sourcing along the way. Particularly want to draw your attention to the top two there, BP and Amoco, and I'll come back to that in terms of how the two came together. I talked about this, and again, I want to keep coming back to 2 different types of sourcing for services versus sourcing for innovation. I'll focus on the left-hand side for a bit, talk about the journey we've been on that particular scale, and then move to the right-hand side, which we just started over the last 6 or 7 years, and it's quite a different animal. So let's look at the journey. BP was one of the original pioneers in outsourcing, as we called it, starting actually in the early 90s, along with players like Xerox and GM, if you recall in the early days. It was strongly driven by our CEO, Lord Brown, whose operating philosophy was that we were an oil and gas company at core, so we ought to retain across the company some core competencies in-house, and then whatever was commodity-like or could be obtained better from the outside was strongly pushed into an outsourcing mode. In some cases, that led us to almost 70, 80, 90% of the work being outsourced. And this is going back early into the 90s when the markets weren't quite ready to take it. In many cases, we pioneered things as we went along. So we started with, if you can read that, we started outsourcing IT. And at that time, it was mainly outsourced to regional players, big players in the UK and the US, and focusing on infrastructure as well as applications. We were one of the first, in fact, started the whole trend in BPO. This is going back to 1993, when in Aberdeen we took our entire back office, accounting back office, and actually set up a BPO operation with Accenture. And that was kind of the early days of founding the whole BPO kind of operation. It was considered lunacy in many aspects, but we persevered and sort of learned a lot along the way, is the best way I can put it. Then look at Amoco. Now these were operating at separate tracks. BP and Amoco were separate companies. BP at the top, extensively outsourced, 80 to 90%, treating outsourcing almost as an internal cultural religion. Very small in-house staff. If you look at Amoco, they took a completely different approach. Their view was to get efficiency by creating a very, very large in-house, 100% in-house shared services organization. They were pioneers in the whole concept of shared services, which is pretty common nowadays, but they actually Amoco spent a lot of time working that whole model. And very proud of it. Virtually all of that was developed through professional expertise in-house. And then something happened. BP and Amoco merged. And people like me were asked to put the merger together on IT. So just imagine a clash of two religions coming to a head. And no amount of debate. We spent 6 to 8 months debating sourcing strategies. But how do you reconcile two religious beliefs that are diametrically opposite, in-house versus totally outside? So finally, we broke the log jam by executive decision at the top, saying we will adopt pretty much the BP approach. This is reality on the ground. You can sit around and talk about theory all day long, but at the end of the day, to break the log jam, somebody had to make a decision, and that's where we almost disbanded a lot of great work that was done there. Now later on I'll come back and say it's come full circle, and we're probably approaching that thing with some regret. But in the heat of the moment, we had to get stuff going. Our target was to get something like $500 million of cost out of the bottom line by doing this thing. And we achieved that in about 18 months. It couldn't be done by debating. We had to just get on and do it.